What if the woman you dismissed as just a waitress was actually the one holding the key to the empire you worship? She didn't walk in wearing designer heels or speak with an air of entitlement. She didn't have a last name anyone cared about, until they realized it was Wolfe. This isn't a Cinderella story. This is a storm disguised as silence. And when the truth came out, it didn't just shatter a room. It shook a legacy. The scent of polished mahogany, expensive wine, and quiet piano music curled through the air like invisible silk as Alara pushed open the heavy glass doors of Étoile, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't advertise. Its name whispered luxury, its velvet booths draped in wealth, and its clientele, the kind who didn't look at price tags, only at bloodlines. Alara stepped inside, alone. Her coat was clean but plain, her shoes simple leather without shine, and her dress, a muted navy that barely caught the light, didn't scream couture, didn't even whisper it, but she walked with purpose, chin up, eyes calm. She was beautiful, breathtaking in a way that didn't beg for attention, the kind of beauty born not from salons, but from stillness. And that was the problem. She didn't fit, not here, not among the diamonds and dinner jackets. The hostess, young, sharp, a little too pleased with herself, barely hid her smirk as Alara approached. "Yes?" she asked, glancing down at her clipboard. "I have a reservation," Alara said evenly. "Name?" "Wolfe," Alara replied, pausing slightly. The hostess blinked, then scoffed. "I don't see a wolf here." Her voice grew a little louder. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Heads turned, the sound of forks pausing midair, champagne flutes clinking down onto marble tables. Alara could feel it. The shift, eyes sliding toward her like knives. She nodded. "Yes, I was told to be here at 7 p.m. The hostess leaned in, lowering her voice but not her tone. "Ma'am, we don't allow walk-ins. Perhaps try the bistro 2 blocks down." Ilara's expression didn't change. "I'm not a walk-in." But the woman was already signaling to another staff member, a male waiter with slicked back hair and tired eyes. He stepped over, clearly uncomfortable. "Is there a problem?" "This guest insists she has a reservation under Wolfe," the hostess said pointedly. The waiter glanced at Alara, at her shoes, her coat, the way she held herself. "Ma'am, we're fully booked tonight. Unless you have confirmation, I'm afraid." "It's fine," Alara said softly, stepping back. "I'll wait." She moved to a corner, away from the golden light and designer gowns. She sat alone at a small bench by the window, her hands folded over her purse, and watched the rain start to drizzle outside. And still, the whispers began. A woman at the next table leaned over to her date. "She probably came in to stay dry," she sneered, or hoping someone rich would pity her with a glass of water. Her date chuckled under his breath. Alara said nothing. She looked out the window, watched the traffic crawl past, and waited. She could have walked out, but she stayed. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because the one who asked her here mattered. He had always mattered, the one who promised, "I'll find you when they least expect it." And something told her, tonight was the night he kept that promise. 20 minutes passed. The rain outside turned heavier, tracing lazy rivers down the tall glass windows of the restaurant. Inside, the lights glowed warmer, and laughter grew louder from patrons too soaked in privilege to notice the quiet woman still seated near the entrance. Alara hadn't moved. Her posture remained poised, her gaze fixed somewhere between memory and anticipation. The hostess walked by her once, then twice, each time offering a tighter smile, the kind reserved for someone you hope leaves quietly. When Alara still didn't budge, the woman approached again, this time with theatrical patience. "Ma'am," she said, voice sweetened by sarcasm, "we've given you time, but unfortunately, we can't have guests lingering without a confirmed reservation. It reflects poorly." Alara blinked slowly. "I said I'll wait." The hostess sighed, louder this time, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Wait for what? A miracle? A chuckle rippled through the air like a small wave of cruelty. A man at the corner table whispered loudly, "Maybe she's waiting for the leftovers." His date giggled, flicking her gold bracelet for attention. The waiter from earlier returned, his eyes pleading now. "Please, miss, if you could just wait outside." "She's not bothering anyone," a voice cut through the air like a blade. It came not from Alara, but from an older woman seated alone at a nearby table, Silver hair, sharp red lipstick, eyes like someone who had seen too much and lost too little. "Let her sit," she added. "The room needs someone who doesn't smell like entitlement." The hostess flinched but forced a smile. "Of course, if our guests prefer," but her voice faltered as the maitre d', tall and anxious, suddenly emerged from the back, rushing toward them with a phone pressed to his ear. His face had drained of color. "Everyone stop," he said, barely loud enough but with authority. He turned to the hostess and whispered something urgently. She froze. Her eyes flicked to Alara, then back to the maitre d'. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice cracking. He nodded, then stepped forward. "Madam Wolfe," he said carefully, "please accept our sincerest apologies. Your table is ready, right this way." Silence fell over the dining room like a dropped curtain. Alara stood, slowly, gracefully, every motion deliberate. She didn't look at anyone, didn't need to. Every person who had whispered now stared in stunned silence. Every server who had looked through her now opened a path. The same people who seconds ago dismissed her as nothing now held their breath. The hostess stood paralyzed, mouth open as if to speak, but no words came. And when Alara passed by her, she paused just for a moment and said with calm finality, "Next time, check the name, not the dress." Then she walked past into the golden light of the inner chamber, and the air changed as if the whole restaurant had just learned that glass slippers didn't always shine. Sometimes they came caked in mud and grace. The maitre d' led Alara through a corridor of stunned silence into the heart of the restaurant's private section. Velvet curtains closed behind her, and the murmurs from the other side faded like a bad memory. A candlelit table awaited her near the window, overlooking the city skyline, set for two, untouched. She sat down slowly, exhaling without realizing she had been holding her breath. The silverware gleamed. The wine had already been uncorked, and yet she reached for the water instead. In the soft flicker of the candle, her reflection danced in the glass. For a moment, she didn't see herself. She saw the girl she used to be. 10 years ago, she had wiped tables in the back of a rundown cafe, her apron always 2 sizes too large, her nails short and cracked from detergent, her shoes secondhand, and her tips small. There was no maitre d' to greet her then, no velvet booths or wine lists, just cheap linoleum floors and the creak of a faulty ceiling fan. And yet, she had served with grace, not because she hoped for anything in return, but because someone once told her that dignity wasn't in the uniform, it was in the heart that wore it. She had never forgotten that. Not even after the night her father collapsed from exhaustion and the bills piled higher than her courage. Not even after her stepmother sold her mother's ring for gas money. And especially not the night she stitched a stranger's wound in the alley behind the cafe, with nothing but a sewing kit and borrowed courage. That man, bleeding, broken, furious at the world, had looked into her eyes and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." And she had smiled back with defiance. "Neither should you." That night changed everything. Because 2 months later, when the cafe closed and she lost everything, a stranger in a charcoal suit returned. Not with promises, but with a plane ticket, a job offer, and a note that simply read, "For saving what's left of me." That was Alec Wolfe. That was the man the world now worshipped and feared. And that was the man she married, quietly, on a beach with no cameras and no witnesses. Not for his money, not for his name, but because for once in her life, someone looked at her and didn't see what she lacked, but what she carried. Now, years later, she still didn't wear diamonds, still tied her hair back in a bun, still drank water before wine. But the difference was, she didn't have to prove anything anymore. She didn't have to walk into a room and earn her right to exist, because she had already done it in the fire, in silence, when no one applauded. The door opened behind her, breaking her thoughts, and the waiter appeared, carrying a small dish, not from the menu, but from memory, a simple bowl of her favorite soup, the one she used to make for Alec when he couldn't sleep. No one told him, no one asked, he just knew. She looked up, nodded with gratitude, and the waiter whispered, "He's on his way, madam," then left her alone once more. Alara looked down at the bowl, then back at her reflection in the wine glass. She didn't see a billionaire's wife. She saw the same girl, the same steel, the same fire. But now, the world would see her too, and they wouldn't be able to look away. The soup was still steaming when the footsteps came, measured, firm, echoing slightly against the marble. Ilara didn't turn. She didn't have to. She felt the room shift, like even the furniture recognized him. Alec Wolfe stepped into the private dining area, not with the fanfare of a billionaire, but with the precision of a man who moved through the world without apology. Tall, sharp-suited in black, his tie undone just enough to suggest he hadn't planned to be late, but life had made other decisions. His eyes found her immediately, softening the moment they did. "You waited," he said, closing the distance. "Of course I did," she replied without looking up. "You told me to." Alec sat across from her, not bothering to order anything, simply reaching for her hand across the table. "You shouldn't have had to endure that outside." "And yet I did," she said evenly. "Because some lessons need to be repeated." Alec's jaw tensed. He hated that part of the world hadn't changed. Hated that no matter how much he gave, the ones who truly carried worth still had to fight to be seen. "It won't happen again," he said. She smiled faintly. "It will, somewhere else, to someone else. But tonight wasn't just about a meal. You knew that." Alec exhaled, leaning back. He watched her in silence for a moment, marveling at how someone so quiet could dismantle arrogance with nothing but poise. "I came here once," she said suddenly. "Long before I met you, I stood outside that same window. Couldn't afford even the tip of the napkin inside." Alec's eyes followed her gaze to the tall glass that separated them from the world. "Funny," he said. "I used to eat here alone, hoping someone would look at me for more than just the balance in my account." She turned to him, curious. "Did they?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Only when the checks came. Silence hung between them, but not a heavy silence, a knowing one. The kind only two people with scars on the same timeline could share. Then came the twist in the air. The maitre d' returned, more nervous than before, and approached Alec with a trembling voice. "Mr. Wolfe, the board meeting. It's begun without you." Alec waved it off. "They'll survive." "But sir," I said, Alec cut in, his voice cool as ice. "They'll survive." The man nodded and left. Ilara tilted her head. "You skipped the quarterly to eat soup with me?" Alec shrugged. "They're my investors. You're my legacy." She blinked, heart softening for a second. Then the door opened again. But this time, not with footsteps. It was a commotion. A man in a gray suit rushed in, looking panicked, followed by the hostess from earlier, her face pale as snow. "I'm sorry, sir," the man blurted. "We didn't know—" "Didn't know what?" Alec asked, his voice calm but sharp enough to split atoms. "Didn't know the woman you dismissed, ignored, and embarrassed was your legal superior?" The hostess's knees visibly shook. "Wait, what?" The man in gray turned to her. "You don't understand. Mrs. Wolfe isn't just his wife. She's on the trust. She owns 49% of Wolfe Holdings." The room tilted. Ilara looked at her wine glass, then finally met the hostess's eyes. "You never know who you're serving," she said gently. "That's the point. That's why kindness should never be optional." The hostess stammered, but no words came. Ilara stood, straightened her coat, and looked at Alec. "I think we've stayed long enough." He nodded, rose without another word, and held her coat as she slipped it on. No one moved. No one blinked. The woman they had ridiculed had just walked out holding half their power in her hands, and as the door closed behind her, the silence left behind said everything. Sometimes, the richest woman in the room is the one who doesn't need to raise her voice. The ride home was quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had already been spoken in silence. The city lights cast gold and silver streaks across the windows of the black SUV as Alec drove, knuckles white against the wheel, jaw tight. Ilara sat beside him, calm as ever, her gaze fixed on the blur of neon outside. "You didn't have to say anything," she said finally. "Not in front of them." Alec's voice was low. "Yes, I did. They deserved to feel small." "They already were," she replied, and something about the way she said it carried more weight than 1,000 angry words. Alec glanced at her, that mix of admiration and helplessness tightening in his chest. "You walked in like they were all guests in your house," he murmured. "Because in a way they were," Ilara said, her lips curling into a faint smile. "They just didn't know whose table they sat at." The car stopped in front of the penthouse building, but Ilara didn't move to get out. "They'll talk," she said. "They always do. Tomorrow the headlines will call me the mystery woman or Billionaire's humble wife. As if that's a punchline. Alex shut off the engine. Let them talk. It's not about them, she said, turning to face him. It's about the girls like me. The ones who see how people like that hostess treat someone different. I want them to know we don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes all it takes is patience and presence. Alec reached over and took her hand, rough and warm. You don't just walk through storms, Alara. You shift their direction. She laughed softly, then opened the door and stepped into the building. The next morning, her name trended. Not because she posted anything, not because Alex said a word, but because someone had leaked the footage, from the restaurant, from the moment she was refused to the moment she walked out. The video went viral within hours. The woman who made a room fall silent. That was the headline. Thousands of women, from interns to mothers, stitched their own stories onto her name. I've been her. This was me last Tuesday. I work in a suit now, but never forget the looks I got in sneakers. Ilara didn't respond to any of it. She simply brewed tea, read a book, and ignored the cameras that now waited outside her building. She had no need to perform. Let the world catch up. Let it learn. What she didn't know, what Alec hadn't yet told her, was that the board of Wolfe Holdings had been watching too. And the boardroom, once filled with men who barely acknowledged her presence, was about to receive its biggest shock yet. Because Alec had already made his decision. And the chair at the head of the table, the one the press thought belonged to him, wasn't his anymore. He had handed it to her, not because she was his wife, but because she had earned it in ways that money could never buy. Because leadership, in Alec's world, wasn't about status or suits. It was about who people became when no one was watching. And Alara, the woman who sat quietly with her soup while the world judged her dress, had just become the most powerful person in a company built by legacy and redefined by grace. The boardroom was colder than usual. 11 men in tailored suits sat around the long obsidian table, their silence broken only by the occasional clink of a pen or shuffle of paper. The air smelled of ego and old money. At the head of the table, the chair remained empty, until the doors opened. Alec walked in first, sharp-eyed and calm, but he didn't take the seat. Instead, he stepped aside, and then she walked in. Ilara Wolfe, wearing a fitted black dress with no jewelry and hair pinned into a simple knot, walked with the kind of composure that didn't need announcement. A few board members blinked. One cleared his throat. Another exchanged a glance with the CFO as if trying to remember her name. Gentlemen, Alec began, his voice even, you all know my wife. What you may not know is that effective today, she's assuming my voting rights and stepping in as interim chairwoman of Wolfe Holdings. The words landed like a small explosion. One man sputtered, Excuse me, Alec, that seat is hers now? Alec interrupted. The papers were signed last week. Alara remained standing. I won't waste your time, she said, her voice calm but cutting. For too long, this company has forgotten that legacy is not just about wealth. It's about who you empower to build it. Yesterday, your restaurant embarrassed itself and lost a high-value client account within 12 hours. That wasn't a board issue, the COO interjected. Ilara's gaze sliced toward him. When your company's face becomes the face of elitist cruelty, it becomes everyone's issue, including the board's. Silence. I've reviewed the numbers, your bleeding reputation capital, and if you think that won't affect valuation, you're more naive than I thought. One of the older members leaned forward, voice patronizing. With respect, Mrs. Wolfe, the board is a place for strategic decisions, not emotional. Wrong, Alara replied without blinking. It's a place for values, and values shape strategy. What you call emotional, I call vision. And judging by your quarterly numbers, you could use some. Alec leaned back, smiling slightly. He hadn't said a word more, and he didn't need to. The baton had been passed, and no one could take it back. By the time the meeting ended, half the board had turned silent, the other half stunned. Alara left the room like she entered it, without permission, without apology. Outside the glass doors, Alec waited. They'll come around, he said. She gave a soft shrug. They don't have to. They just have to move when I say move. He chuckled. You're not the woman I married. I am, she corrected. You just finally let me stand where I was meant to. And then, as they walked toward the elevators, a young intern holding a tray of coffee accidentally stumbled forward. Alara reached out without hesitation, steadying her before she fell. "Thank you?" the girl whispered, cheeks flushed. Alara smiled. "What's your name?" "Jamie," the girl said. "This is my first week." Alara nodded. "Remember this. One day they'll underestimate you too. Let them. It's the best setup for a storm." The girl's eyes widened as Alara disappeared into the elevator. Upstairs, the city glittered with wealth. But inside, for the first time, it was being rewritten by the hands of someone who knew what being invisible felt like, and who had no intention of letting anyone else fade ever again. The morning papers didn't ask for permission. By sunrise, Alara's face was everywhere, on glossy covers, financial newsletters, trending hashtags. From waitress to Wolfe, the silent billionaire, she walked in with soup, walked out with power. The stories ranged from awestruck to intrusive. Old photos surfaced. Articles romanticized her past. A photo of her in her first cafe apron, tired, smiling, blurred, was now plastered beside her boardroom shot from the day before. Alec watched the media circus unfold from across the room, his phone buzzing with requests for interviews, morning show appearances, soft focus features. Alara, meanwhile, stood at the window of their penthouse, untouched by the noise. "I never wanted this," she murmured. Alec approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't ask for it, but you earned it." "And now they'll twist it," she said, her voice quiet. "Make it about rags to riches, like I was rescued by love, like I didn't claw my way here with my own hands." Alec's voice was low. "Let them write their fairy tales. We'll keep living the truth." But what Alara didn't know, what Alec had kept from her for weeks, was that someone had been digging deeper. A former investor, ousted years ago, had seen the footage and recognized her. Not from Alec's world, but from his own. He remembered a debt, a time when Alara had stopped a hostile acquisition by alerting a mentor she used to serve coffee to. That mentor, a silent partner in Wolfe Holdings, one who had, without Alara knowing, vouched for her inclusion in the trust long before Alec proposed. The truth was, Alara had been chosen not because she was Alec's wife, but because she was already a force. One people in power had quietly learned to fear and respect. And now, that truth was threatening to surface. The media didn't want humility. They wanted dirt. And if they couldn't find a scandal, they'd create one. That evening, as Alara left a meeting at the foundation she recently launched for underprivileged girls, a reporter shoved a microphone into her face. "Mrs. Wolfe, is it true you were placed on the trust before your marriage? Was your relationship with Mr. Wolfe strategic? Did you marry up?" The cameras flashed like lightning. Her security stepped in, but Alara raised a hand. She looked directly into the lens. "I didn't marry up. I married someone who saw me clearly, long before the world cared to look. And if my presence here threatens your narrative of what power should look like, that's your discomfort to deal with, not mine." And with that, she walked past the chaos. Not fast, not flinching, just steady. Like a storm that no longer needed thunder to prove its power. From the outside, Wolfe Holdings looked untouchable. Towering floors of glass and steel. Polished marble lobbies. A name synonymous with power. But inside, the walls were whispering. Not everyone welcomed Alara's rise. While the media praised her calm strength and vision, behind closed doors, old money fumed. At the core was Bernard Langston. Alec's godfather has been, longtime board member and investor since the beginning. He was the kind of man who believed empires should be inherited, not earned. He called a quiet meeting with 3 other senior partners, all men who felt equally threatened. "She's changing everything," Langston hissed, his fingers drumming on the oak table. "Philanthropy over profit, ethics over speed. This company wasn't built on feelings." "But the valuation's up," one man pointed out. "Its stock confidence has risen since her restructuring." "It's temporary," Langston snapped. "Sentiment always is. We need to regain control before she rewrites the entire legacy." Their plan was simple. Target Alec's trust. Spread whispers that he'd given up control, not out of vision, but weakness. That Alara had manipulated him. That her past, modest, undocumented working class, made her unfit to control billions. The rumors began to circulate subtly. Articles citing anonymous sources questioned Alec's judgment. Memes surfaced online mocking waitress CEOs. Investors received anonymous emails filled with half-truths about Alara's ambition. But Alec had seen it coming. He had been silent, not blind. And what Langston hadn't realized was that Alara had allies of her own. Jamie, the intern Alara had encouraged weeks earlier, had overheard a conversation in the executive lounge. She recorded enough to prove collusion. When she slipped the file into Alara's office, she expected nothing, just gratitude. But Alara called her in the next day, handed her a full-time offer, and said 6 words Jamie would never forget. Power is nothing without those behind it. The next board meeting was different. Alara entered not with rage, but with receipts. She played the audio clip calmly as Langston's face paled. His voice was clear. "We take her down quietly. By the time she notices, it'll be too late." When the recording ended, silence clung to the air like ash. Alara looked around the table. Any other collaborators? Anyone else uncomfortable being led by a woman who remembers what it's like to be invisible? No one spoke, not even Langston. Alec watched from the corner, pride and fury mingling in his eyes. "Your shares will be bought out by morning," Alara told Langston. "Security will escort you out now." And just like that, the man who once decided legacies was removed by the woman he thought would fold under the pressure. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Because when truth is your weapon, silence becomes your greatest ally. In the weeks following Langston's fall, Wolfe Holdings became something no one expected. A company people admired, not just for its market power, but for its conscience. Under Alara's leadership, old policies were rewritten, pay gaps were addressed. A mentorship program for underprivileged girls launched quietly, but grew louder with every success story. Employees who had once walked the halls in silence now stood taller, especially the ones who once believed they'd never rise past the front desk. But not everyone was celebrating. At a shareholders' summit, a seasoned analyst posed a question laced with sugar and poison. "Mrs. Wolfe," he asked, leaning into the mic, "while your reforms are impressive, some say they're too idealistic, that you lack the financial pedigree required to guide $1 billion legacy." There was a pause. Cameras clicked. Alara looked at him, then smiled. Not with sarcasm, but with stillness. "I understand the concern," she said. "But let me ask you this. What pedigree did the founder have when he sold software from his garage? What formal legacy did Alec have when he took the helm? We applaud men who build from scratch, but question women who rise from the same dirt." A wave of silence swept through the room. She continued, "I am not asking for permission. I am proving what happens when leadership is rooted in lived experience. And if that threatens tradition, then tradition should be nervous." The crowd erupted. Not all, but enough to shift the air. That evening, Alara received a message from someone she hadn't heard from in years, her estranged mother. The woman who once told her she'd never amount to anything, who had kicked her out at 17 with nothing but a backpack and a bus ticket. The message was short. "I saw you on the news. I was wrong." Alara stared at the screen for a long time. No anger, no tears, just a quiet, strange peace. She showed it to Alec without saying a word. He put his arm around her and kissed her forehead. "Sometimes the crown you wear isn't on your head," he whispered. "It's in how you walk past those who tried to keep you small." Later that night, the two of them sat on the penthouse balcony, barefoot, watching the city breathe beneath them. Alara turned to him, her voice soft. "I didn't want any of this attention." Alec nodded. "I know, but I'm starting to realize maybe it was never about me." She paused. "Maybe it was about every girl who serves coffee in silence, every woman who's told she isn't enough, every person who's made to believe power only belongs to the polished. Maybe I had to walk through fire, so they'd know they could too." Alec squeezed her hand. "And you did, with grace." She looked at him, a gentle fire in her eyes. "Then let's make sure the fire spreads, not to burn, but to light the way." The ballroom was bathed in soft gold, the chandeliers glistening like frozen starlight, and every table was adorned with white orchids and crystal flutes. It was the annual Wolfe Foundation Gala, an event once known for excess and exclusivity. But this year, it felt different. Because this year, the name behind it, Alara Wolfe meant something else. The guests arrived in silks and tuxedos, expecting a night of opulence. What they didn't expect was the woman who stepped onto the stage. No dramatic music, no spotlight cue, just Alara in a midnight blue dress, minimal jewelry, hair swept back, walking with the kind of quiet power that made the entire room still. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she began, voice steady. "Not in this room, not in this world. I was supposed to serve the wine, not raise the glass. I was supposed to wait by the door, not walk through it." The audience was silent, drawn in like gravity. But somewhere along the way, I realized something. The world doesn't give you a crown, you build it. With every no, you take a step. With every hand, you choose not to slap back. With every girl you lift instead of leaving behind. Cameras flashed, but Alara didn't blink. Tonight, we honor the women who never had a seat at the table, so we built our own. And for the record, she added, smiling gently, you're all welcome to sit, if you bring respect. Applause, but not polite, not obligated. It was the kind of applause that rose slowly, from awe. Alex stood at the back, hands in his pockets, pride softening the corners of his eyes. He hadn't said a word all night. He didn't need to. Alara wasn't standing in his shadow. She was standing in her own sunrise. After the gala, she stepped onto the empty balcony, shoes in hand, and looked over the city skyline. "You were brilliant," Alex said, joining her. "You always say that," she teased, "because it's always true." He pulled a small box from his jacket. "And because I still owe you this." She opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, not diamond, not flashy, but a thin band of interwoven gold and silver. Elegant, quiet, strong, like her. "I never proposed properly," Alex said. "Back then, I wasn't ready. You deserve more than a man learning how to love through silence." "And now," she whispered. "Now," he said, dropping to one knee. "I know exactly who I'm kneeling for. Alara, will you marry me again?" Her smile was quiet, but her eyes brimmed. I never stopped. As they embraced, the city lights shimmered like distant blessings. Somewhere far below, a girl scrubbed dishes in a cafe, wondering if the world would ever see her. It would, because Alara Wolfe had shown it how them. They had laughed when she stepped into the showroom with scraped heels and no reservation. They had mocked her when she didn't know the wine list, rolled their eyes when she spoke softly, looked through her like she was invisible. But the day she rose, not in anger, but in quiet, unshakable truth, they didn't laugh. They listened, they bowed. Because she wasn't just someone's wife, she was the storm they never saw coming. And as she stood with her crown, unclaimed but undeniable, she didn't gloat. She forgave. Because real power doesn't need revenge. It simply remembers, and in remembering, it rewrites everything.